Random alternate presidents, because why not? Scenario 1. William Henry Harrison, after getting elected, has a little bit better health. This means John Tyler will never become president. This means the Whig Party, which has a super duper majority, remains still, given that Tyler was basically a Whig in all but name, which means the First National Bank is reinstated, and the Mexican-American War doesn't happen. Now, it was basically Whig policy in all but name to not run for a second term, so that would just be it for WHH, with a legacy of reform and being the oldest president till the 80s, which means in 1844, Henry Clay, the great negotiator, gets elected, continuing the Whig policy of kicking that slavery thing down the road. But the Texas can't be kicked anymore, and being Henry Clay, he negotiates that Texas is a little big, not big, and it can join the U.S., but because of this and the dealing with the Washington Territory, the slave states are feeling underrepresented, and there must be a balance of power, so luckily, the caste war is happening in the Yucatan Peninsula, and the Mayan population tries begging America for annexation, and after a skirmish with Mexico, this leads to America annexing most of the Yucatan with a Mayan Republic of Kusan. Zachary Taylor becomes the third Whig in a row to get elected, and he was a caste war veteran. He also wanted to not talk about slavery at all. He died, and super racist Millard Fillmore took over. The Mormon Trail would occur when Mormons are moving into Mexican Utah. There might be a situation similar to Texas, but also America didn't really like the Mormons, so maybe Mexico just makes a state of Deseret for them. Then the Democrats come in with Franklin Pierce, and then after that we eventually get the Civil War, which would basically be the same, just now with a feeder in Yucatan. The Confederates would probably annex Kusan afterwards, which means the U.S. now has a full Yucatan Peninsula, and eventually it just becomes the California of this world, thanks to its nice weather, good location, and being far away from everything so Hollywood would set up. The Whig Party will still probably fall apart, or with John C. Fremont just become the Republican Party. Scenario 2. William Jennings Bryan, by the skin of his teeth, is elected. In 1896, by a narrow margin, this means he is the youngest U.S. president ever at 36, not young. He would notably introduce his bimetallism idea of introducing a silver standard. This would be good for farmers in the short term to pay off debts, also a herd factory profit margin in the short term. It'll eventually pay off, but people hate waiting. Hawaii will never be annexed. The Spanish-American War would probably not happen, or if there's enough people yelling, there might be a moderate amount. Like just a Caribbean theater. So America treats Cuba kind of like how we treat Puerto Rico today, where everyone wants it to be a state, but the actual government. Puerto Rico remains with Spain until the Spanish Civil War, where America forces a independent republic on everyone. Spain eventually has to sell the Philippines to Germany, who loses it to Japan after World War I, then the British take over, and it remains a Commonwealth nation today. Bryan loses re-election, and he has most of his stuff either taken away or weakened, but then he wins a non-consecutive second term. By 1904, Bryan has this very progressive and populist, yet also kind of weirdly conservative in a very American way stances on a lot of things. Scenario 3. Warren G. Harding lives because heart attacks aren't guaranteed to be fatal, but because of this, he lives long enough to see the Teapot Dome unearthed, where it's revealed he'd been selling the Navy's oil for big money, which leads to basically a Richard Nixon moment in the 20s. Harding would probably live until maybe the late 40s, and Calvin Coolidge becomes the Gerald Ford for a generation, serving one term and then losing to Al Smith, who ends Prohibition early, but also the Great Depression happens under his watch, and everyone blames him because he's Catholic, which leads to Herbert Hoover getting elected. But the strategy of try nothing and hope it works itself out doesn't actually work, which leads to FDR coming in and saving everyone. Scenario 4, and speaking of, he decides to not seek a third term. So John Nance Garner, with the Postmaster General, James Farley, goes to run instead. But the Republicans have Wendell Willkie, who's pro-New Deal but also feels it's gone not far enough and is poorly run and is honestly more like FDR than John Nance is. It's close, but Willkie becomes the next president, just in time to see World War II start for America. Willkie honestly wasn't that much different from FDR and would probably do more or less the same thing. But he also then died running for a second term, if not earlier, from the stress of the war. So Charles McNary becomes president, and if Willkie died just a week before the election, that means Charles McNary would die 5 weeks after getting inaugurated. So his vice president, Thomas Dewey, wins. The Dewey would do basically the same thing as FDR and Truman do, probably to a more moderate degree though, where they're pro-civil rights and stuff, but very slowly to implement it. And with his VP, Harold Stassen, they take a very strong anti-communist stance. And to be fair, they start the interstate highway system. Dwight D. Eisenhower was very popular for being just a kind of normal guy, and also the Allied commander of World War II, so both parties really wanted to draft him. If the Republicans select Douglas MacArthur, then this would absolutely put a fire under Ike's ass to go to the Democrats, and maybe he'll even take Adlai Stevenson to be his vice president, which is ironic he ran against him in real life. And honestly, I don't think Ike would really be that different. Maybe he wouldn't be a Christian conservative, though. And there will be a lot of people arguing that he was America's first atheist president because he was never baptized, but also a lot of American presidents weren't, and he definitely wouldn't have seen himself as one. Adlai will attempt to run for the Democratic nominee in the 60s, but lose to JFK, and will just get back on track. Scenario 5. Getting George McGovern actually elected is kind of an uphill battle, but not completely impossible, so what if the Watergate scandal was released early? McGovern's progressiveness alienated a lot of the working-class, blue-collar Democrat voters. Thomas Eagleton also had mental health problems, which was very not okay in the 70s, so instead we'll give him Ted Kennedy to be his running mate to basically drive him to victory. On a very progressive platform, and people realize, yeah, he is in Nixon, so hell yeah. The Vietnam War would have ended exactly the same, and honestly, McGovern's term kind of reminds me of Gough Whitlam in Australia. Passing the Equal Rights Amendment, making sure women are paid the exact same as men, ending the death penalty, decriminalizing LSD and weed, making universities free, giving families $1,000 a year, and launching a large-scale gun buyback program. And basically just doing everything Jimmy Carter would have done. McGovern would squeeze by a second term, and his legacy would be one of progression and pushing America to the left. 72 being the first election that 18-year-olds can vote, no surprise McGovern was very popular with the youth. Well, the old people hated his guts, which eventually leads to Walter Mondale losing the election of 1980 to Ronald Reagan, who'd be the ultimate conservative reaction to McGovern, ending the free money to American families thing, ending the government's large gun buyback program, bringing the weed and LSD thing back to the states to decide, and of course they went with banning it until the 90s. But because McGovern won, this actually pushes the Democrats to eventually not be so scared to be progressive, eventually leading to the presidency of Al Gore and even the presidency of Howard Dean in 2004. Final scenario for the video. Joe Biden realizes he is old and upsetting no matter what he does, so retires and doesn't even plan to seek a second term. So Harris enters the nominee election that's pretty tough against Josh Shapiro. Donald Trump is actually held accountable for his crimes and goes to jail, leading to Nikki Haley, the former UN ambassador, to become the Republican nominee, with Doug Burgum as her running mate. RFK Jr. runs as an independent with Tulsi Gabbard. But just like the recent Mexican elections, it was guaranteed the president will be an Asian American woman, running with an old guy with very big eyebrows. Haley really failed to energize her base because woman, leading to many Republicans not even voting, which leads to Kamala Harris being elected the 47th President of America, becoming a major milestone in history. She might have not been the 100% perfect progressive darling that everyone wanted, and she definitely has trouble communicating and stumbles over herself a lot, but she also continued to bite an economy, seeing major investment in infrastructure and green energy, combating climate change, investing $3 million into new housing, battling conservative courts to reinstate Roe v. Wade, giving tax credits to families. There's no constant threats of tariffs that constantly break the economy just to prove how much of a big boy they are, giving more support to Ukraine, eventually winning the war for Ukraine in 2027. She did fund Israel but cut the funding in half, and especially after a failed ceasefire agreement, leading to Netanyahu being charged with war crimes and sent to the International Court. Speaking of arrest, she also released the unredacted Epstein files, leading to many terrible people getting arrested. There's no invasion of Venezuela, and the government's not ran by self-centered, stupid jackasses, and if you're offended by me saying this, you really actually need to watch the news and listen to what they're doing. Also, Mark Carney becomes the shortest-serving Canadian Prime Minister ever at 9 days. And Tim Walz eventually doesn't seek being re-elected as Vice President because people are just straight up harassing his family. So Pete Buttigieg becomes the next Vice President, and the first openly gay one. And Kamala Harris becomes the first president re-elected since Barack Obama. But let me know down below any opinions, thoughts. Like and subscribe is really appreciated, as well as hyping on mobile.